How about you take it away?
Okay, great. We've got the recording going. So just to let everyone know, Mitsubishi Cement was planning on being here today, and hopefully they'll be able to chime in here maybe shortly, but they did ask that we would record this meeting because it's definitely a topic of interest for them. So thank you everyone for being here today. We welcome you to our panel discussion today on this very exciting topic, energy prices. I think on both a business level and a personal level, that's a topic that I'm not sure if it's near and dear to our hearts, but it creates angst for many of us. So our topic is energy prices. How high can they go and how to survive? So we do have some panel experts today who will be discussing this topic. And we are going to ask that you would either place your questions in the chat as we go out through the next 60 minutes or so, but all questions will be addressed at the end of the when all the panelists have completed their presentations. We want to make sure we get through all of this topic, and you can either ask the question orally, so through chat, or just chime right in, but we're going to hold all the questions and answers towards the end, please. And I also wanted to announce that we have another upcoming event, and I will be dropping the link to get more information for that event. If you are a manufacturer, on December the 5th, we are having a mixer for manufacturers in Redlands. And of course, the location escapes me. JP, help me. I don't have that handy.
Oh,
What's the name of the venue? Do you remember? Maybe Vincent. Anyways, I'll drop all the information in the chat.
is it
I thought that was a
Escape?
pun. It is Escape.
It's
Okay.
Escape. It's Escape. They hosted it there last year. I was not able to attend, but I heard it was a lot of fun and a lot of rubbing elbows with our manufacturers. So we hope you can attend that. And again, I'll drop the link for that. And then I also, since I didn't even introduce myself officially, my name is Sandra Cisco. I am the Director of Development and Strategic Partnerships. I recently, or probably January of this year, I joined MCIE. I've been working with them, however, since 2010, very familiar with this organization and the great work that they do. So recently we officially implemented and launched memberships. So if I will be dropping another chat in the box also, if you would like to become a member to help support events just like this one, where we share a lot of valuable information with the community, with our educators. We have Mary Romero on today. Hi, Mary, it's so good to see you. So I will drop those two bits of information for you. And I don't know if we, Wally, would you please introduce yourself? I can't go any further without you introducing yourself.
Oh, hi, I'm Wally Brithany. I'm the president of the Manufacturers Council, and I kind of lost some time during the day, so I didn't get on early before the meeting, but I look forward to the meeting, the subject matter, and then we'll have a few things to talk about in the Q&A portion. So thank you very much. Thanks, Sandra, for starting the meeting.
Wally. Our president, who's technically retired, but he's the hardest working retired person I've ever seen. So thank you, Wally. And so now I'm going to hand it over to JP, another one of our team members, who will be your moderator today. JP, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Wally. Hello and welcome everyone to our energy panel, if you will. The pun might have been intended, and while the title of our talk may be a little angst-inducing, it's certainly timely, and it, I think, may hit different manufacturers in different ways, and I think we'll try to address as many of those as possible in the time we have allowed. So most of you know me as part of the MCIE team as the communications strategist, but by day, I also am a renewable energy professional. I work for a utility scale solar developer based out of Texas, but I am based in the Inland Empire where I've grown up. And prior to that, I helped manufacturers like many of us here on this call figure out how to finance and structure C&I renewable energy projects at their companies, working for a bank. So there's a lot of knowledge and expertise that the MCIE has on this topic to help people navigate this this topic. It's huge. There's a lot of jargon flying around. Everybody maybe has heard about how solar might work on someone's house, or perhaps you've thought about a Tesla battery. There's tax credits, payback periods. It can be a little difficult to wrap one's head around. And I think at the very beginning, and certainly the panelists will help us break this down, is that for commercial and industrial applications, it kind of has its own set of rules. And what I think is exciting is that the area which is encapsulated within the Inland Empire, and we'll get further into this, is a prime location for various applications of renewable energy by virtue of the intensity of the sun, the volatility of the prices, which is a headache for manufacturers now, but these are applications that can help manage that volatility if possible. And then we also have certain legislative developments that have popped up in the last months that the MCIE has talked about. Wally has certainly been very engaged in the Department of Energy Matching Grants Program, which we'll have him address a little more at the end. And I know that there's already manufacturers who are working with the MCIE on how to take advantage of this equipment grant from the Department of Energy. It's possible that it could help to pay for equipment in some of these possibilities here for energy efficiency. Then there's also the SB 253 and 261 that we heard about when CMTA gave our last month's panel, namely the Climate Impact Reporting Bill, which on the face of it only impacts manufacturers of $1 billion in sales or more, but it goes all the way up the supply chain and all the way down. And so if you're a manufacturer in this area and you do packaging for Church & Dwight, your climate impact is now an item of marketing. So this is a top line and a bottom line issue for manufacturers. And so how do we address all of that? There's a lot there. So without further ado, I will introduce our three panelists who have joined us here today. First of all, we'll hear from Professor Johannes Moines of the University of Redlands, who is a spatial economist, which and focuses mainly on planning and economic trends on our regional economy. He's been quoted by Bloomberg on several occasions talking about the economy of the Inland Empire, and we are thrilled to have him here again today. He's spoken for us in the past. And so he'll be talking to us briefly about the shape of our energy markets now and where we expect to see those go from here. And what does that mean specifically for a manufacturer or for businesses that help support manufacturers? Then we also have two renewable energy developers from our area who have joined us here today. We have next Anthony Papavero from Current Renewables. And then we have Brent Beckwith from Shorebreak Renewables. And the two of them will have the Herculean task of breaking down a lot of what I've just run over, a mile wide and an inch deep. But we think they're even to the task, and we'll finish off with some question and answer for everyone. If there's specific things on your mind, something about a pesky endangered species that you're trying to, that might be impacting a project, we can discuss all these things and more. And just as Sandra said, for those of us who maybe joined a little bit after the hour, we ask that so we can cover all this subject matter, that as questions pop up, please drop them in the chat. And we will address all questions and answers at the end of the program. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Moines, who will start our program.
All right. Can you hear me all well? Okay, good.
Sure can.
So yeah, very good. So Vincent, if you were able to share the slides. So I called the talk "Energy and Manufacturing." It's of course way too big a topic, so I'll just pick a few slides, things out of the huge range of potential things that you might want to discuss. Next slide, please. So in specifically, I'll talk about why energy matters so much for the US economy and why you should care, even if you don't care about renewables or whatever, why should you have an eye on the energy market if you are a manufacturer? I will take a quick look at historical energy prices, oil, gas, and electricity, talk about the EEI outlook, the Energy Information Agency outlook, and what I have some doubt or questions about, I should say, so to add my own perspective and what I think are possible options, or how, if I was a manufacturer, I'm not a manufacturer. Well, actually, I'm part of a startup team that does manufacture stuff, but that's more in the artificial intelligence realm. And so, what to do if I was in the shoes of a manufacturer? So, next slide, please. So, the most important insight that I think I can share today with you is that all but one US recession, post-war recession, has been preceded by an oil price increase. All but one US recession has been preceded by an oil price increase. So if you think about that, that puts a whole different spin on the whole energy topic. So, for example, people say, oh, yeah, in 2007, we had this housing crash. But there is, in academic circles, it's actually quite widely accepted that the huge oil price spike that we had right before contributed substantially to the depth and the breadth of that recession that we saw. And so the only two that are more questionable are the ones that are caused by the pandemic, of course, and then in the 80s, where we only had a sort of employment recession. Next slide, please. One big part why I'm talking about oil and the rest will be about electricity is that 2/3 of our energy comes from oil and gas. And gas prices are really important in terms of determining the electricity costs, but they're way more predictable for manufacturers. And the other part of it is really to be aware that from all the energy service, from all the energy that's in our primary energy carriers, we only use about 1/3. 2/3 are just puffed into the air. And that's why energy efficiency, and as our panelists will talk about it in a little bit, play such a big role. I will not address that directly. Next slide, please. And why does it matter for please go through that relatively quickly. Why does it matter so much for the Inland Empire? Because if you think about the costs to drive to work, guess which place takes number one in the country? Well, one more click, please. It's our location here. So it's literally that we are in the prime spot to be affected by high energy costs. So whenever oil prices go up in the world, then I'm starting to get worried. Next slide. And that has to do really with the distribution of income and economic activity. All the red spots that you see here that was in 2011. That was the last real big oil price shock that we saw. At that time, when you see a red spot here, that means people spend 8% plus of their income on average. The average household spends 8% plus on their income just to drive to work. Next slide, please. And so for that reason, it makes really sense to take a look at energy and energy prices. Next slide. So as you already saw from this slide, energy prices are hugely volatile. If you look at oil prices in the 70s, they started out with 30 and then they jumped all the way up to 140 and then like even higher up to that's prices per barrel here. And then if you look at gas prices, which is the next slide, you can see that recently they have also been not very friendly to us. And that has happened before. So like from the ranges from 2 to 10 dollars here. If you go to the next slide, you see that this has happened periodically. We saw wild price swings historically. So having an eye on gas prices in this context also makes sense. If we go to the next slide, we'll see that electricity prices has been a little bit smoother. This is just like split up by residential, small, medium, and large commercial properties and agricultural. And you can see that they have been softly trending upwards, but they've been trending upwards, but by far less volatile than what we saw in the energy market. And so next slide, on the long run, you can see that we saw pretty much a 3 to 4% increase over time since 79, since 1979, even all the way up to here. So I calculated that yesterday. That's coming down to a 3 to 4% increase over time. So, which brings me to the next point. If you go to the next slide, you can sometimes see these, oh, we saw these huge increases in energy prices. Well, there are sometimes specific tariffs, if that applies to you, where you can see larger than the 3 to 4%. But over the long run, 3 to 4% is the range that we've seen historically. And there is good reason, as you will see in a minute, why this should not necessarily increase that much further. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to really drive home is that fossil fuel prices are highly volatile. Electricity prices are substantially smoother and more predictable. Therefore, electrification removes energy cost risk. So whenever you see that you have an opportunity that like the primary energy may still be the cheaper on average for you, but if you're more worried about energy cost risk, trying to electrify your operations may make sense. So let's take a look at the energy outlook. Next two slides, like we can chop this one and go to the next slide. So if you look at the energy outlook, then the AEI gives us a target price of $101 by 2050. But they're pretty sure about like being very narrow in the bandwidth. They say it'll be somewhere between $50 and $190. I'm pretty sure every single person in this room would have been able to make that same prediction, correct? It'll be somewhere between $50 and $190. So the Energy Information Agency, unfortunately, has not the best of track records also historically in predicting oil prices and the like, because they're very, very difficult to predict, as you have seen with the recent events in Ukraine and what that did to the energy markets. They don't offer a direct price forecast, but they forecast higher production and lower national consumption. I'll actually say not like they have an implicit forecast. They also say that electricity capacity will double by 2050, and all growth that we'll see will come from solar, wind, and storage capacity. So solar itself, they think in terms of capacity will grow tenfold. Next slide, please. Like actually, let's skip that in the interest of time. So there, if you look at the left panel here, you will see that they see clearly that wind, solar, and storage capacity, which they also count in the total production capacity, will go down quite substantially. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that I'm a little bit more skeptical, because if you look at the recent pricing trends, we've reached a plateau, and so I don't actually think that those steep drops will happen anytime soon, and that has to do with some stuff that others on this panel can explain better. So let's skip two more slides. Or this, yes, here, this one. So this is what happened to battery prices. Historically, you see like from 2013 to 2022, they have come down like enormously. It's basically a fifth of what they used to be. Next slide. And they're predicted to go down for next 7 years, and that is reasonable. Next slide. To half in the next 7 years. So what to do? The way, next slide, I would like to think you about it is really in two terms. One is the return on investment. The return on investment for the home sector means you'll get pretty much a payback period now of about 10 years. For manufacturers, much lower. Next slide. So I did some calculations and said, like, well, what should you really think about if you were an average manufacturer? So this is just a simulation, and we can go through those assumptions in a second. Next slide. And I calculated, well, if you're an average manufacturer and you are in California, you will have a loss from outage, expected loss from about $340,000. If you buy a generator and operate it, it costs you $164,000, and skip to the last line. But if you go for off-grid operation, it'll be actually $73,000, your total cost. So jump to the last slide, and I can explain why that is later. Last slide. So in summary, one before that, please. In summary, fossil fuel prices are highly volatile with large economic implications. So it's worthwhile to check that. The big problem here in California is power outages and how to insure against them. And so if you want to insure against it, you may want to consider electrification as much as you can, but there is no simple solution. You need to have an expert really come in and get a professional, unbiased consultation in terms of what is your best option. But under all scenarios that I calculated, it definitely makes sense to do that. With that, I hand it back to JP. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, and thank you, Johannes. And this is fascinating information. And I guess I'd be kind of curious to drill down a little bit on electric base load. So we in California still have a primarily fossil fuel driven electricity base load, right? Although it is technically natural gas. And then there's also the issues, which I think many people have at least experienced in their homes, if not their businesses, the issues of on-peak and off-peak tariff pricing. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about those impacts on a manufacturer's bottom line, that kind of volatility.
Yeah. So if you could actually then go back to my third to last slide that I just skipped because I wanted to talk about that, but I skipped it in order to be within the allotted time. So if that was possible, what you can see is just an example of time of use rates, which means you may face a higher price early in the morning, a lower price specifically in the future, in the middle of the day, and much substantially higher price, often 4 times as high in the evening hours. So slide 27 shows an example of that. And so the reason for that is that solar power is becoming so cheap that it makes a lot of sense to offer it really cheaply to everyone during the middle of the day. But then in the evening hours when prices or when demand kicks in, then in order to meet the demand, we need to have expensive sources of energy to produce. So now, what is the solution for manufacturers? Is there a possibility to insure against that? Yes, because depending on your size, you may be able to have storage solutions developed for you. And then all you do is you gather electricity in the middle of the day with the cheap solar energy from the sun. And then, I'm sure the next panelist will talk about that in detail. And then you use that energy when it's expensive. And if you happen to have extra energy left over, you can pump it back to the grid for remuneration. So that is why off-grid or near off-grid solutions are cheaper, or can be cheaper than, say, buying a generator to insure just against outages. So you make good use of storage in order to use it productively.
Absolutely. And I'll just interject and point out a couple. Thank you, Johannes. And we'll be moving on to our next panelist imminently, but I'll just point out at the very end, there's a couple concepts there. So when Johannes is talking about storage, that's generally one of the terms in the industry used for battery storage, which typically take the shape of lithium-ion batteries. Maybe some of us have been following the developments of the air quotes white gold rush down in the Salton Sea. That commercial viability of sourcing that lithium has been established domestically in our area in Imperial County. And there's expectations the next 5 or 6 years that that is a theme that could increasingly develop here in our region. So, battery cost is a huge driver in the idea of taking on BESS or storage as a technology, and that could be a potential manufacturing opportunity developing here in our own backyard. Thank you, Professor Moines. And now I'll introduce Anthony Papavero of Current Renewables to present his section of the program.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here. If I get those slides up here. Yeah, there we go. Well, company is named Current Renewables. We are an energy consulting / brokerage company. We are unique in the marketplace because we come at the problem in a very objective way. We don't come in with any sort of preconceived notions. We are technology neutral or agnostic, however you'd like to look at it. We are there to find out what the problem is and solve those problems and meet goals of the customer. We've been around. I've been around in the market for over 10 years plus, and have pretty much seen just about everything in the market. I've seen it all. I've seen things come and go. I've seen companies come and go, and I know what works. I've seen it in application, and we have really great partners to call on for specific technologies, et cetera, that we were talking about before, batteries in particular, let's say. I thank Johannes for setting the context of this this environment that we're all worried about, and I'd like to now I'll go to the next slide and just show you what I'm going to be talking about. There is a process involved in bringing these projects to fruition, right? We talk about them and we talk and talk, but there's actually a process, and there are some action items that you must take in order to achieve these goals, right? So I'm going to look at this 4-step process that as I call it, over these past years. There's really 4 steps generally that you have to walk through in order to be successful and bring these projects to your business. Then I'll look at some potential technologies and solutions, some that we've already talked about. And then I want to look at the what's called the IRA, or the Inflation Reduction Act, which is blowing up the market at the moment. It's really brought things to life in many different ways. Next slide. Such a beautiful little object. I love it, but it's the ire of all of. It's the biggest problem we deal with. I look at this every day. I see these all the time, and that's the thing that's taking so much of our money and so much of our operating costs, and we need to deal with it. And so let's look at a 4-step process and try and break it down. Next slide. So number 1, goals and objectives. This seems very obvious. Some of these things will seem obvious, but believe me, they're not. I've been through this process many, many times, and just determining what your goals and objectives are, it becomes a real problem. Inevitably, when I talk to a new client, it's please offset our load 100%. Please do it at the lowest cost possible, and we'd love a 2-year payback. Those are inevitable conversations. They just really are not enough for a company like ours to move forward on. We need to peel that onion back in many different ways. Is there a resiliency? These are questions that I would ask clients, and they need to then give me response. Is there a resiliency issue with your manufacturing, or your whatever you're manufacturing? Do you need resiliency? A lot of times that's not something that people think about. Case in point, we're doing a 500 kW carport system for a clinic in Central California. We didn't understand that. We were just looking at PV only. We didn't understand that they had a dialysis center in this new clinic. That dialysis center cannot be offline for 1 second. Once we understood that, well, we were able to sort of go back in and redesign the system. It's still a PV, but now it includes a storage system. And that storage and that battery, one of the parts of that battery is set up to have instantaneous power. So we've looked at that, we've solved that problem, but we wouldn't know that until we pull that out of the client. Do you have a large demand on your bill? I'm not sure how many folks have actually looked at their bill and noticed the demand side of their bill can be up to and over 50% of your actual bill. How do you plan on mitigating demand? We can look at that as well. Do you have supply chain requirements? I talked to a client today, actually, very large software company in San Diego. He's very worried about the supply chain requirements that he's going to have to meet, and wants to know what we can do as soon as possible to get him up to speed in terms of his greenhouse gas calculation in order to meet those requirements, because he cannot lose that place in the supply chain. State and local requirements are maybe something I'm not aware of. We need to pull all of these things out. Is it a strict marketing position that you take? Believe it or not, I've had that happen. We're doing this strictly, we call it greenwashing. It has happened. I've had customers do that. We're perfectly willing to facilitate that, but we need to know what you're looking to achieve in order to meet those goals. Next slide. So the second phase, obvious analysis. We need to look at your billing data. I really require 2 years worth of bills, along with 2 years worth of 15-minute interval data. That interval data allows us to create a model. We can look back now and see it over a 2-year period. How have you used your energy over that time? How has it changed? Where has it increased? Where has it decreased? How are you using demand, et cetera? This is an SCE bill. We're probably all fairly familiar with this, but you'd be surprised how many manufacturers don't really look at this bill that carefully. It's just that simple. There are a lot of things in this bill that can tell us a lot how we should go forward. You can see in this particular case, I think it's about a 50% demand, and demand is a killer. It's something we can deal with, but we really need to understand where that's coming from, why it's happening, and go from there. So rate schedules, this happens to be a TOU GS2 option D. Can be confusing, but you need to understand what schedule you're on. At this very moment, some of the manufacturers out there should look at that bill, look at the rate schedule that you're on, because you could change the rate that you're on today or tomorrow and start saving money. You may be on the wrong rate schedule. SCE very rarely calls you to tell you you're on the wrong rate schedule. You need to be proactive in that regard. And the last thing in the analysis is a physical site review. Obviously, if we're looking at PV, we need to look at the roof. Pretty obvious. What is that roof made of? Is it a built-up roof that's 20 years old? We have to justify a 30-year PV system with the life cycle of a roof. So when those two things are out of sync, we need to make some recommendations on roofing. Structurally, very important. I've done some crawling around in commercial spaces and trying to figure out exactly what the roof structure is made up of. We need to make sure that it's structurally capable of holding the weight that we're going to be placing on top of the roof. These are just seemingly obvious things, but they take time. They require a lot of experience in what order they happen. We need to get all this stuff done. The last thing in terms of a physical site review is the interconnection. It's one thing that's sometimes left off to the side, but the interconnection of, for instance, a PV system is critical. It can be the bottleneck for the entire system. We tend to look at two different ways to interconnect a system. It's on the load side of a switchgear or the line side of a switchgear. Depending on which one you have to choose, or you could have a lot more cost, a lot more delays, There's a lot more engineering. A line side connection or a line side tap is very engineering heavy and can slow a project down considerably. So we really have to look at that switchgear and understand it. Let's go to the
And
next
these
slide.
are-
I did put an example together, and I think I'm going to just pass over this slide and then the following two just in this for time purposes. I can always come back. So the third step is financing. So once we get to this step, this is the painful area that we need to talk about, where there's actual money changing hands. How are we going to pay for this project? There's literally two different ways to do it. The obvious one is cash, and the other is called the PPA, or a power purchase agreement. The power purchase agreement, most people may not be familiar with that term, but it's an interesting one where you are basically leasing out your roof space to a third party. That third party installs the system, maintains the system, and you have there's no upfront cost for you in this arrangement. You only pay for the power that the system produces over time. And the benefit there is that hopefully, if we structure it correctly, you're paying less than you would pay to the utility. So over time, your savings can be pretty substantial with a PPA. However, you're not benefiting from all of the tax benefits and the depreciation that come with a cash purchase. So you have to weigh those two things out. Again, this goes back to the first step in terms of goals. What are your actual goals? We need to understand that. And if we know what your goals are, we can steer you in a direction that makes the most sense in terms of how you'll finance the system. But PPAs have been around for a long time. They're very, very common. And a lot of nonprofits use them because they obviously have no tax appetite. So the PPA works really well for them. Outside of that, cash is typically your best, from my experience, seeing these, cash is always the best way to go. You're going to get a much better return on your initial investment. You utilize all the tax incentives and depreciation, et cetera. So go ahead.
Thank you so much, Tony. And, one thing that stands out to me, and it reminds me of conversations that you and I have had, and it's that there are a lot of different options and ways to customize this to the particular need or desire of the manufacturer. So, I mean, this is a concept or framework that works with other technologies, right? Like hydrogen fuel cell.
Sure. Yes.
For example, so I mean, suppose you have a forklift fleet, or suppose you have a fleet of electric trucks that you use for deliveries, or suppose you want to offer electric vehicle charging as an employee benefit. All of these are things that can be sort of built in to whichever system you would like to have constructed, right?
Absolutely, those are all perfectly valid things. We are doing a lot of EV chargers at the moment. So something that I'm very interested in, and I think in the future, not too distant future, we'll need EV to grid relationships. So there'll be a bidirectional charging routine that will allow for a lot of these very large batteries on wheels to actually participate in the grid and make income from that. So yes, we're looking at all that, and any of the systems that we talk about or look at in terms of bringing to the table, we can finance in either of these two ways. Very common ways to do that.
And speaking as a recovering banker from this area, there's opportunities in the leasing space as well. That's sort of a middle tense on all this, right? Like, and it could be structured as a conditional loan if you want to keep the depreciation, or a lease if you don't. I know there are a couple banks here in our region that do have programs in equipment finance and in renewable energy finance. East West Bank and Covina, I met their team before, and I believe they do financing in that category. But I'm sure there are other providers too. It might be worth talking with your banker.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I left leases off because it's a little bit of a hybrid. I don't see that many of them in the C&I space. So I sort of shied away from that. But yeah, of course, there's other ways to finance, but these are the two most common that I see
For sure.
going forward. I guess let's go to the next slide. So at step 4, right? I looked at this right before we presented, and I'd have to say this first bullet point is probably more appropriate for the first step, because you're going to be hiring. Hopefully, you're going to hire someone like us, someone who's objective, that can provide you with information that they're not selling something necessarily, and that's kind of how we see our role in this. We're objective. We're not selling, so they can look at us as a trustworthy. So you'd want to have that already in place. I would also suggest writing an RFP. I know that sounds daunting. It doesn't have to be a 100-page RFP. It can be a 1-page RFP, or even call it a scope of work, because what you want to do is get this information out to as many 2 to 3 integrators or contractors that you can find, and you want all of those 3 contractors to be bidding the same thing. Otherwise, you're going to get numbers that are all over the place. So it's always important to have an RFP, some sort of scope of work that you can deliver to these contractors. You're gonna have a much better result if you do that step. And then of course get 2 or 3 proposals from EPCs or contractors. We work with some of the best EPCs out there, and we would bring those contractors to the table. Hopefully the customer would sign a contract with them, and we take our small fee from the contractor after a contract is signed. So the customer actually never pays us directly. So we're always on the tail end of that, hoping to solve that problem and get a contract signed. Next slide.
Tony, we're running a bit short on time,
that's what I thought.
but I wonder if we might be able to return to this in Q&A.
Yeah, and the last slide, I'll just go to the last one. This is the Inflation Reduction. Well, not that one. The Inflation Reduction Act, I think, is really critical, something to talk about, to try and understand. It is a tax credit, where you can layer different tax credits on top of the 30% initial ITC. This is a great way to finance any of these projects. It's fantastic stuff. So I'd like to talk about that if we could.
Absolutely.
I'll end it there.
Thank you so much, Tony. And this is fertile ground for the Q&A section. Now I think we'll hand things over to Brent to present his portion.
Okay, great. Well, thanks guys for having me. I'm Brent Beckwith. I'm from Shorebreak Energy Developers, and our focus is really solar to manufacturers. That's all I do. And I found that manufacturers, they have high power demands, and they are really looking at their electricity bill is a huge component of their expenses. So if we can help them to reduce their electricity costs with solar, that can really have a big impact on their business. And one thing I wanted to kind of clarify about selling solar to manufacturers is that it's very rare that you're actually going to get 100% offset of their demands with solar. So it ranges anywhere from 10% to, I do have some prospects that are up to 100%, but typically it's more like in the 25 to 35% range as far as how much the solar is going to be offset as far as their electricity demands. Vincent, one of the things I wanted to show is the chart on electricity cost by state. Can you bring that up, Vincent? So as you can see here, Hawaii is the most expensive electricity in the country, but which kind of makes sense because they have to bring in natural gas in order to produce electricity. But California has 18 cents a kilowatt hour rate, and all the other states on here really, are in the Northeast, where they don't have as much sun as we have. And so California it's almost like winning the lottery solar ticket, because we have, high electricity costs, we have lots of sunshine. And also there's, I've seen maps where it really kind of shows, the area where you can produce a lot of electricity. And the Inland Empire is even further a great opportunity area to do solar. So one of the other things that I wanted to show is that I'm a sales and marketing guy, and I need to make things simple and have it be impactful. So I created a 2-minute video that explains why a manufacturer should go solar. So I wanted to have Vincent show that video.
You already know that solar energy is good for the planet. But do you know solar is one of the best long-term investments a manufacturer can make to boost profits? If you didn't, this video will explain the question, why should my building go solar? To encourage solar adoption, the federal government is willing to pick up 30% of the tab for a solar project with the Federal Solar Investment Tax Credit. Also, to encourage capital purchases, the federal government allows companies to depreciate 80% of capital purchases in the first tax year. Federal tax credits, federal depreciation, and state depreciation combined can reduce the cost of a solar project by 63%. The remaining 37% can be offset by utility savings. Electric bills are an endless expense that increases on average 4% a year. The same dollar spent with the utility can be redirected to a solar investment. After tax credits and depreciation, the average payback is 5 years. After the payback, the system will provide free electricity for 25 plus years. A $1 million solar system with a net cost of $370,000 could save $2,849,000 over 25 years. Solar projects can be financed over 7 and 10 years with positive cash flow. After the payback period, the reduction in electricity costs from the solar system will reduce expenses and boost profits. That can mean hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in avoided expenses and increased profits. Going solar not only boosts profits, but it also reduces carbon emissions. A solar system on a 100,000 square foot roof has the environmental impact of taking 150 cars off the road. Going solar creates a positive image of your company that can increase sales and profitability. If you can provide a recent electric bill, we will create a preliminary solar analysis that will provide a project payback, cost savings, cost of project, and environmental impact. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Hopefully, we were able to explain why your building should go solar. We look forward to receiving your latest electric bill and providing you with a custom solar analysis.
So anyways, what's kind of cool about that video is that I actually have a marketing piece that's a marketing folder that when you open it up, it has a screen in it that you press a button and it'll play the video. So I'm sending that out to, CFOs, presidents of companies, and it's really kind of a neat thing to actually get a video in the marketing folder that they can watch, as they want. So any questions or feedback?
And if something pops up later, absolutely feel free to drop it into the chat. Our Q&A session will be coming here close at the end, so we can keep moving along as well, Brent, if you like.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I think we had a hand up.
Oh, good.
Yeah, my question to Brent.
Yeah.
You mentioned somewhere that the kilowatt hour prices in California is 18 cents per kilowatt. And is this for businesses? This what you meant, or for residential?
I
know the prices now for both way higher than that.
Yeah, it's probably an older chart, but it was one that showed, I think everything has gone up to a certain degree, but I think California still is, I think it's kind of an average probably of retail and commercial is probably what it is. And
probably from across the state too.
More. What's that, John?
Oh, just simply that it might be an average from across the state as well.
Yeah, it is.
So, we're taking in several utilities and energy markets within the state into that figure.
Yeah.
Yeah, from my understanding, the city of Colton only, because they own their own substation, so they purchase the power from Edison, they condition it and they sell it to their residential, so their kilowatt hour is 18 cents per kilowatt. But for others, I think like there is no less than 25 cents per
Yeah, especially for residential.
right.
Yeah, and I know that like PG&E and San Diego Gas and Electric, they're even higher than Southern California Edison. So they've been really impacted, especially PG&E.
So you mentioned something like watching your video where you work with businesses on custom their solar or PV system, right? So
Yeah.
like companies with higher electric bill, like Mitsubishi, for example, if there is anyone from Mitsubishi, their electric utility bill, it's over $2 million a month.
Yeah.
And since that the solar system is not going to offset all their electricity, do you work with them on having a hybrid system or just custom design solar system?
Well, I think it's going to be, I don't know if they've looked into cogen, Anthony. Is that any sort of application for cogen at the?
I was going to say that's a perfect segue to cogen. We're doing a cogen plant for a software company in San Diego. They may have a similar base load, and that load is so huge that there's no chance that we could ever put solar on that site and even touch their utility. So or offset their utility. So we're actually creating a combined heat and power system for that particular site. And I think it would probably work well for the Mitsubishi factory or manufacturer as well.
Yeah, probably the amount of solar would be such a small amount. It may not even be worth it.
That's exactly what I found as well.
Have such an intense need for power.
Yes, that's what I find as well with it. Cogen, as you know, Brent, I mean, combined heat and power is you do have to find the right manufacturer. They do need to take the heat that's produced. They have to do something with the heat in order to make these systems efficient. The one that I'm talking about now, we just toured a plant this morning, actually, a cogen plant in Corona for a manufacturer out there who has had that system running for over 20 years and is completely happy with it. You need to be able to utilize that residual heat. And in most cases, we do that using an absorption chiller, and we create chilled water with that heat that's produced, and we cool the building and the manufacturing processes with that. And 80% efficiency is what we're looking at typically. It's the highest and best use of natural gas as I see it to deliver energy.
Yeah.
But just to add to that, if you reach 80% efficiency, that's absolutely unbelievable. The average in the United States is about 30%. So if you're reaching 80%, you're just like over 80%. The top.
Yeah, but you do have to have all those things have to fall in line. That you have to utilize that residual heat. You have to have the mechanical, there's absorption chillers. There's a lot of mechanical systems that go into it, but when that is figured out, and in the case of, again, the plant that we toured this morning, 80%, if not more than 80% efficient. So there's nothing like combined heat and power if you can utilize it.
These are all really great points and a great discussion as well. And I think before we open it up again to general Q&A, I'll just go ahead and do a little bit of wrap up, and then we can cut to some of the concepts that I think are really worth drilling down on in each of your presentations. But just sort of in summation, I think there's a lot on the menu here for the developer or for the manufacturer in terms of a partnership with the developer. to build something that suits the custom need of a manufacturing location. And, in the event that the roof is weak and you have a large parking lot, sunshade solar structures are increasingly common here in this area. And that's, another resource that you can think about monetizing at your facility. And then there's sort of the last business opportunity, because we did touch a little bit about the legislative risks right now about, being able to maintain contracts with large manufacturers by being able to speak about climate activity that you're engaging in and being more environmentally efficient. But that is that in the development of renewable energy, there's been some talk of tax credits, which we'll get to in a moment. But there's something which I'd like to ask the developers on our panel about, and it's called local content. And this is a huge topic in utility scale developments, as well as in solar, as well as in wind. So if you've seen those large scale farms out towards Las Vegas, or if you've been following what's going on with the Port of Long Beach and the construction of one of the largest offshore wind servicing ports on the West Coast here in Southern California, to support the development of offshore wind off the Pacific coast, which will probably unfold for the better part of a decade. These projects are being required by the federal government in order to collect a certain part of their tax credit to source parts of the developments from local manufacturers and supply chains. And so what that means is if it's a California project, they need to source as much as they can from California or neighboring states. It's already been run this way with New York. There's agreements that include New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Connecticut in their local content rules. But so, suppose all of this is to say, if it's just too soon for you to add a renewable energy set of equipment to your manufacturing processes, it's possible you might actually find this to be a business opportunity too, and you could potentially be a supplier to something that is probably going to be a large groundswell for the next decade, economically speaking. But with all of that said, and before we get to Q&A, just a short plug from our president, Wally Britheny, who has done a great deal of research on the Department of Energy matching grant, which MCIE has been helping manufacturers to get. Wally, are you there? Maybe you're on mute.
I think he's on.
There we go. Yes. By the way, I just sent via chat a link to today's energy data from the California Independent System Operator. It gives you a link to a website that's kind of fun to look at, but it'll show you that we're up to, if you look on the page that I sent the link for, you'll see the amount of the production, the supply sources and amounts that the state of California, the three public utilities, Southern California Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric, and Pacific Gas and Electric combined, and then what their sources are for energy, including the renewables portion. And you'll see that we're now up to, in today, at about from say 9 a.m. to about 1 p.m. that we had about 17,000 megawatts of solar production today that came into that portion of the state of California. That's huge. 20 years ago, that was zero. We didn't have that. So, a couple of years ago, I remember seeing it at 12,000 megawatts. Now, a small generating plant, let's say like the Mountain View plant in San Bernardino, Redlands, in that what we used to call the donut hole, that's probably about an 1,100 megawatt plant, 1,100. So when you're seeing numbers like 17,000 megawatts during those peak hours, that's almost like 16 power plants coming online during the day. So and what the gentlemen here are talking about is adding your contribution, putting solar panels on the roof. So I'll just say that it's happening whether you join the crowd or not. The photovoltaic is really the gorilla in the room in terms of the renewables, in terms of those numbers, and you can see that. And every day you can check it. By the way, it's an interesting thing. There's also sites for the demand side in the system, and it'll give you an idea. Californians, by and large, are pretty efficient in the United States. California users, if you will, average about 1 kilowatt per person in California. The United States average is probably about 1.5 kilowatts per person. So Californians have been pretty energy efficient. What we're talking about here is producing power to smooth out your costs, if you can do that, and then using storage. I'd like to just say that there is also the idea of energy efficiency. The idea of a kilowatt saved can greatly reduce your energy costs. So right now, going back actually 50 years practically, the Department of Energy, back to 1978 when it got started, or 1977, took over the project called the Industrial Assessment Centers. So I'm just going to talk about something different than producing electricity. But there is a program that we're promoting to help with, and that is manufacturers can get a free assessment. Small to medium manufacturers can get a free energy assessment from several of the colleges in the area. University
UC Irvine, isn't it?
What's that?
Oh, just UC Irvine is one of them. Isn't
UC
it?
Irvine and Cal State San Diego both are industrial assessment centers. That probably will grow in the future. There will be others, but right now those are the two that we're working with. And so the free industrial assessments produce reports that will give you 6 to 8 suggestions that happen to have 2 to 3 year paybacks in terms of mostly, let's just say, energy efficiency measures. A team of students and faculty come out to your facility and would assess what you're doing, how many hours you work, what's your compressor sizes, your air handling, things that use energy and primarily, and then they will come back with a report that's very nicely done, and with 6 to 8 suggestions of things that your plant can do to save energy. Now, that has been enlarged under the bipartisan infrastructure law, which now can be, there's new money coming into the program to this universities, and a new direction. The new direction includes productivity increases by the use of smart manufacturing technology, and also electrification. So I saw Professor Moynihan mention that electrification can help smooth out a manufacturer's costs. That is, can you convert a process that's burning fossil fuel in your process to something that uses electricity? And the program, that doesn't necessarily reduce the total energy usage. To convert from, say, natural gas to electricity doesn't necessarily mean a reduction of energy. However, under the new program from the Department of Energy, that will be considered as, let's say, an acceptable measure, because what the goal now is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, more so than just energy reduction, and productivity increasing. So the program now is also increasing and encouraging that manufacturers become more competitive in the world market and adopt these what are called smart technologies. And there's quite a number of different things that are considered smart technologies. Now, for small and medium manufacturers that are qualified, there's some qualifications. That power bill that Professor Moyni has put up showed a power bill of about $9,000 electric bill per month. That would be just under $100,000 in electricity. Let's say a manufacturer had that bill that Professor Moyni has had on his slideshow. That plant would have to look at their electrical costs for a year and their gas costs for a year, and you can probably throw in water or even so let's say water, utility costs, and it has to be at least $100,000 for a firm to qualify for these to get into the Industrial Assessment Center process, where they would do an assessment. So that would be kind of towards the bottom end size-wise of a small firm. Now that means small firms could be too small to qualify for the process, and it would just have to say, unfortunately, there is to get the free assessment, you have to have at least $100,000 annually of bills from your utilities. In addition, out of that, let's just say there are 6 to 8 recommendations. That's the typical report, and it's nicely done. It'll tell you expected cost for the enhancement and expected savings, energy savings, and energy cost savings. From that data, you can send that. Now, this is, let's call it step number 2, is can you get money as a manufacturer from the federal government, from the Department of Energy, to help pay for implementation? So let's say you look at this list of 6 to 8 suggestions, and you like 3 of them, 4 of them. It turns out that on average, there's more than 20,000 assessments have been done nationwide, and people usually actually implement about half of the suggestions. I know Brittany Electric, when we had such an assessment, we implemented 4 out of 8 of the suggestions. These are not cheap suggestions, by the way. They're not inexpensive. Well, what exists now that didn't exist when we had our assessment done at the Brittany Electric was that the Department of Energy can pay you up to matching funds up to $300,000 to implement on those suggestions. And so if you have a $600,000 worth of suggestions that you feel like you'd like to do, and you've got $300,000 available, and that can include, by the way, it can include Edison rebates, can include some other incentives that might be out there. As long as you can put together your $300,000, the Department of Energy can throw in $300,000 and help to pay for those projects. So that what we've done is made a commitment to not to do a few things. One is, if you call Debbie Smith, who's working for the Manufacturers Council, she's not online today, then she'll help you get started with that. She'll help you and make the contact to the universities and get that part started. And then we haven't got, this is so new, we haven't got to the stage yet where somebody's ready to apply to the Department of Energy. It takes several months to do this, okay? To get your report and for the school to do an assessment. These use students and faculty, so it's got to fit the school year also. And you would get a team of maybe 5 to 7 people, let's say 5 students. Some of them can be graduate students, some of them can be working on their bachelor's degree, and then 1 or 2 faculty members, which would normally be mechanical engineers or electrical engineers or both. They come out to your facility and make this assessment. Okay, you get, finally, a couple months later, you get your report and you say, I'd like to do some of these projects. I'll pick this one, number 1, 3, and 5, let's say. And now you would send that back to the Department of Energy as a grant proposal, along with a narrative portion that would say what these projects will do for you besides just energy savings or in productivity improvements. And that's the part we will help with also. We want to be there. One of the things that the schools have found is that small businesses are reluctant to contact the Department of Energy and try to involve a grant. They've never worked on grants. They've never submitted for a grant proposal. So we have said we'll help that process and along. And so then what's another component that the Manufacturers Council is going to be doing? When it comes to smart technology, people like UC Irvine really want to move into that area with smart technology. And smart technology can be things like virtual reality, augmented reality, vision sets, smart glasses, numerical analysis of various sorts. And so what we're going to try to do is put on a technology conference or technology workshop put on by not UC Irvine per se. UCLA has something called CESME, which is a Center for Excellence of Manufacturing with Smart Technology, and put on a technology conference. Try to do it locally. We want to do this in the high desert, and we want to do it in the Riverside, San Bernardino area, which would introduce you to the technologies so that you kind of see what these proposals could include when they come to you. In other words, if you don't know what smart technology is, and the UC Irvine does your assessment and they recommend certain things, we want to introduce you to what those technologies are, what the vendors are like. They would be putting on the exhibit. There would be like an exhibit hall, and our problem so far is just finding sites to do this. Actually, the CESME is actually funded by the Department of Energy, and so they've already got sort of speakers lined up and exhibitors, and it's a matter of citing it. And so we're going to be doing that, and we want to do the high desert, and we want to do this in call it the central portion of the Inland Empire. In terms of the high desert, we have a cement industry and a mining industry that's quite different and large, and there is smart technology available for those industries that they want to focus on. And that's what the folks from CESME and from the El Camino College, who are partners in that effort, say, they want to focus on. So be aware that we've got this coming up. It's not to generate electricity. But the thing that's also new is that photovoltaic installations can be one of the suggested lines from the industrial assessments, and those are now allowed not only to be used, because they weren't before. Putting photovoltaic on was not allowed in the industrial assessment center bag of tricks that they would say, here's suggestions for you. They are now allowed, and those will be considered for that 50% match up to $300,000. So this would help push some of that forward.
And absolutely, Wally, this is great information. And so for those of you out there with us today, there's a lot more to stay tuned on. This is a huge topic. But while we're here and we have some solar experts with us, let's open the floor to some Q&A. And maybe you can do some studying and research now to think about as you maybe wonder if you could qualify for one of those DOE grants. Do we have any questions from the audience? And at this point, you don't need to drop it in the chat. You can raise your hand or shout out. Well, maybe to get the ball rolling, let's maybe cut back a little bit to tax credits, which sounds about as dry as Thanksgiving stuffing, but it is a key and important point in how all this works. And I mean, I hardly need to explain to a manufacturer the power of depreciation in someone's income statement. And these investments function in a similar way. So, Brent, Tony, could you talk a little bit to the 30% and 40% ITC and how that sort of take shape? I mean, this is in effect another federal discount from Uncle Sam, right? 30 or 40% off. Try getting that on Black Friday.
Right. Yeah. Well, the recent Inflation Reduction Act has extended the 30% tax credit. We were expecting it to drop in the next few years, but we are now in the next 10 years, we'll have this 30% tax credit for the next 10 years, which is essentially a dollar for dollar tax credit. $1 million system is, you're now paying $700,000 on unavoided tax, essentially. So you have that, and with the IRA, there's also adders now, so you can add 10% for using American-made products. And in the case of, let's say, a carport, solar carport, as long as all the steel comes from a U.S. manufacturer and 40% of the additional components come from a U.S. manufacturer, it's an additional 10%. So that's 40% now. And then there's another adder. If you happen to, this is actually happening now. I have a project out in the desert. It's a megawatt solar, straight solar project, no big deal. They're going to get the 30% tax credit. But I just recently realized, in looking at the NREL map, they provide a map that you can look at. They actually fall within a low-income community. They happen to be a very successful manufacturer. They're in a low-income community. They are going to apply for an additional 10% because they're in that low-income community. So we're what is that now? 40%, 50%. I'm losing track, but you get the idea. You can. These are cumulative, and there's additional ones as well. There's one called an energy community bonus, which I don't think will affect us much. It's more about brownfield development. But the other two that I talked about in the 30%, this is a phenomenal time to do PV or combined heat and power. We're getting paybacks. I'm telling you, we have a payback of less than 2 years on a combined heat and power plant that's almost 2 megawatts. So it is a fantastic time to look into this. I do want to take one step back and agree that the first and the best thing to do is to look at the low-hanging fruit. Energy efficiency is the most boring thing of all time. It's not sexy like solar, but it's the first thing you should do. Lighting retrofits, insulation, any sort of controls that you can do to manage your demand will shrink that load, and then we can come in with a system that can actually offset it much more efficiently. So I totally agree with that, and we always lead with energy efficiency. It's just that exciting.
No, absolutely. And I think now's a good point to sort of also drill down on when we talk about the useful life of a piece of equipment here. So like how long, what is the life of a solar plant? On a tax basis, I think it's about 40 years of depreciation. Generally, you assume that, this sort of an investment lasts quite a long time, right, Tony? Right, Brent?
Yeah, I mean, they talk about up to 30, 40 years, is kind of the typical amount of time that they're, and you also have a degrade factor on the panels. So it's usually about 0.5% a year. So over time, you're going to lose maybe 10%, somewhere around there, 10, 15%.
There's a couple ways you can manage around that, right? Like with overbuild, like if you say that at the end of your useful life, you want to manage to a certain number, like 100 kilowatts, you overbuild. So that way it sort of degrades down to that number. So, if that amount of information.
Yeah. There's just, go ahead.
No. I was
I think Wally had his hand up. Yeah.
Thanks, Tony. I was going to ask, is there any thing on the horizon about any significant improvements in the solar panel production? In other words, the electrical production or efficiency of the solar panels themselves. In other words, where given the square footage that there's going to be breakthrough stuff. I think I've read about some things, but I'm not sure. Anyhow, any words that you guys have?
Well, anything that's commercially available, it's around 21% efficient at this point, and that doesn't seem to be changing much at this point. They seem to, the form factor is getting much bigger. They're getting huge now, and that doesn't really equate to efficiency necessarily. But no, I think 21% is a pretty good average now. We're not seeing much more improvement.
Now, there are some innovations in how they can be deployed, such as sometimes I've seen double-sided solar panels placed over a reflective base. And so the top side of the solar panel runs as you would expect it to. And then the sun that misses the panel and hits the reflective surface down below comes up and hits the bottom of the panel. And then there are other adjustments, such like what Tony was talking about, that can raise the efficiency of the overall system, even though, between 20 and 30% that's basically, 20 or 30% of the sunlight that actually hits the panel actually becomes electricity. But so, I mean, there's plenty of room for improvement there. And then I think with domestic production, and I think that's something we'll see more of, certainly in battery storage in our area, but I would expect solar probably will begin to see some updrafts other places, is that, a lot of the panels come from overseas. And there's been some challenges with that, which developers manage to, and that's part of the purchasing process. But part of the IRA has also provided an on-ramp for domestic production of renewable energy items. And, maybe manufacturers take note, if you do something with glass or with wiring or things of that nature, componentry for solar panels, there are further tax credits that can help foster that as an infant industry in the United States. But Tony, you had a point.
Actually, I think Johannes had his hand up.
Oh, yes.
No, I just want to say that historically, solar panel prices have been going down by 7% per year on average for comparable output. Battery prices have gone down by like more than 10% per year. That means we should see a halving of the battery prices in about 7 years again, which is actually the more important aspect, because at the moment, at least, for, I don't know what it is exactly for commercial, but for residential solar installations, the solar panel module prices or costs account for only 18% of the costs. So even if the solar panel cost shrinks further, it doesn't really affect it as much. And so the deployment things that JP just mentioned are great. They've been in like all kinds of variations in the testing and making and so on for decades. I mean, in principle, we can create nanotube solar panels with an efficiency of 90%, but that's which is crazy, of course, but they're not technically practical. So that we can do something theoretically doesn't mean that it's in the deployment view for the next decade. And I'm not seeing that. I'm actually questioning that we'll see a lot of a decline in solar deployment costs, because now labor costs go up. Soft costs are like something that I don't understand well enough. Maybe Tony and Brent can tell us more about that. But the true electricity parts, the microconverters and are 15% and the solar panels are 18%. So they're less than 30% of the total costs, and that's where we normally saw the shrinking in the costs.
Absolutely, a great point. And I'm eyeballing the clock, and it is the end of the workday for everyone. But I think we can absolutely connect anyone who's been watching the call today with any of the panelists. If there are further questions, Brent, Tony, Johannes, would you welcome that kind of outreach?
Sure, absolutely.
And we thank you so much for spending some time with us here today, and we hope this has been informative. Sandra, is there anything we need to say in closing?
I was trying to do a screenshot, and if it's not too late, it would be nice if we were all smiling and looking directly at the screen. What do you think? Can we do it?
Great, perfect.
Okay, let me get this snipping tool since my screenshot is not working very well.